I got this wild idea. What would be the strangest, most exotic place in the world we could ever take students? And the answer was North Korea. So I went to my provost and I asked him, would you ever even give permission for me to take students to North Korea?
You just heard Wind Goodfriend from Buena Vista University in Storm Lake, Iowa. Garth interviewed Wind for episode 209 of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff.
Sage Publishing is proud to partner with Psych Sessions. In fact, Sage has been partnering with psychology educators for a very long time, publishing STP's flagship journal, Teaching of Psychology, as well as established textbook titles in many psychology areas, including Intro Psych. And many of Sage's offerings are available on the Sage Vantage Learning Platform, which blends textbook content with multimedia activities and auto-graded assignments to drive student engagement and accountability, while giving you more time to focus on student interaction. We want to invite you to check out their Intro Psych titles by visiting collegepublishing.sagepub.com/intro psych. The Psych Sessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. Psych Sessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter. Folks, Macmillan is always here to help you confront today's toughest teaching challenges, like academic dishonesty. Their recently published Educator's Guide to Academic Integrity is full of ideas for using Achieve, which is their acclaimed digital platform, to take cheating off the table. And you can get it for free at macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions. So if you're tired of students putting more work into cheating than studying, then you should definitely check it out. And don't worry, Macmillan Learning has made it easier than ever to integrate Achieve's digital content into your course. Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning. Again, visit macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions to receive the Educator's Guide to Academic Integrity. Hi folks, this is Garth, and I want to tell you about an intro psych book from Sumo Learning. That's SOOMO. The book is called Psychology in the Real World by author Jennifer Harper. Sumo and Harper have taken seriously the APA-IPI recommendation that scientific inquiry and research methods should be the foundation for all content areas. So they built research spotlight activities into every chapter with focus on identifying and evaluating scientific claims, which is the applied stuff that we all want our students to be able to do coming out of this course. It's got LMS integration and auto-grading and supplements like slides and test questions and notes, and it's affordable at only $50. So check it out. Go to sumolearning.com, that's SOOMO learning.com, and get a preview of psychology in the real world. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Psych Sessions. I am here with Dr. Wind Goodfriend, who is Professor of Experimental Psychology and the Assistant Dean for Liberal Arts at Buena Vista University in Storm Lake, Iowa. Is that right?
That's right. Hi, Garth. How are you?
Hey, good. Storm Lake, Iowa. I got to tell you, I had to Google Maps this and figure out where exactly that was. And I'll tell you what was funny is I love visiting different places in different states. And in like a month from now, I'm going to be in Des Moines, Iowa for the first time. And if I would have known, we might have done this in person. I don't know.
That would have been great. Why are you coming to Iowa? Not that many people come here on purpose.
You know what? I co-founded this intro psych online conference during the pandemic called Intro Psych Coast to Coast, and Joshua Woods, who is at Des Moines, and I should know Grandview, maybe, so he is there, and he is going to take over the directorship of that conference, and so we're going to go have a meeting and just kind of plan for the future. So that's what's bringing me to Iowa. But here's what I know about Iowa, because I've done the AP reading for a long time. Actually, I've now retired from the AP reading, but there are great teachers in Iowa. Like, there is a very strong contingent of psychology teachers there. So
absolutely. And I'm from Iowa originally. I love Iowa. So I didn't mean to be saying anything bad about Iowa. I love it here. I was born and raised here. I left for a while and I came back on purpose. So props to Iowa.
Yeah, I want to get into that because, for a number of reasons. I did look at your journey a little bit, and so we'll let everybody in on that shortly. But here's why we're talking today, because you are a massive contributor in the teaching of psychology world and beyond. And you and I were just talking before we started recording about where we first met. And I knew it. I knew I had seen you give a talk, and you said it was at NITOP a long time ago, right?
Yes, it was at NITOP. It was right when my social psychology textbook was coming out. And so I've only been able to go to NITOP once, but that is where we met.
Oh, okay. So yes. So you were giving one of the concurrent sessions there.
Right.
And we met in the hallway very briefly, but you knew my podcast partner, Eric Landrum.
Right. Because I was at Boise State as a professor for 2 years, and Eric and I became friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I said ahead of time, he just thinks very highly of you. He was excited that we were having this conversation. And so anyway, I just want to welcome you to the podcast, and thanks for doing this. I am intrigued by your story because you and I have been emailing back and forth, and you said something about a interesting or weird or something childhood that I want to get into. I want to figure out who you are and how you came to this point. And I'm sorry, I did a little digging. I also know that you're a decorated teacher and that you've won some awards. You're a textbook author. You've written a lot of stuff. Have you only written textbooks, or have you written other things as well, right?
I have. Just maybe 4 months ago, I hit 100 publications.
Goodness. So what's your writing schedule like? Do you get up every day and get after it consistently?
It is pretty much my only hobby. I have no children. I used to have a dog, but pretty much I teach and I write.
Yeah, yeah. So on those Iowa days where you're buried in snow, because I remember that happening this year. Yeah,
it is either snow or too hot. So
when do you have to be? Here's just an interest, like a curiosity question. Would you consider yourself? Like where are you on the introversion extroversion scale? Like, do you like being by yourself and doing writing, or do you need to have that like social outlet as well?
That's a great question. I think I probably don't really fit either introverted or extroverted. I think I'm probably right in the middle of the bell curve, and sort of the environment really shapes my personality.
Yeah.
In terms of my personality, the thing that really drives me is I'm like extremely low in anxiety, meaning I have no anxiety, which has advantages and disadvantages because it puts me in maybe overly risky situations when I should maybe be a little bit more prudent. As an example, I spent a week in North Korea just for fun.
What? My wife is going to die when she tries to convince me of these kinds of things. And I think it's ridiculous. And anybody who knows my wife out there, you know that she's cut out of the same cloth. Okay, give us a little bit of North Korea. How did that come about?
Oh, it's a completely... First of all, I think your wife is probably wise to maybe like not go. So
maybe she was wise to marry somebody who said you can't go.
Oh, wait. So you're the one who says that you want to go or not to go? Sorry.
No, I hold her back from like she's through the roof on openness, and I'm like, we got to tame it down a little bit.
We, at my university here in Iowa, we take students on international trips every May for 2 or 3 weeks. And I got this wild idea. What would be the strangest, most exotic place in the world we could ever take students? And the answer was North Korea. So I went to my provost and I asked him, would you ever even give permission for me to take students to North Korea? And this was, granted, 12 years ago. Okay. Sure. So it was actually right in the transition of Kim's. So basically, he said, well, I guess I would be willing to let you go if you went on your own beforehand and you did the itinerary and you felt like it was safe. So I actually went without students for a week and did it and was going to take students the following year, but Kim Jong-il died and Kim Jong-un took over in that year period. And Kim Jong-un put out a propaganda video saying, I'm going to take Americans hostage. And so we decided, yeah, probably shouldn't take students to Pyongyang. So that was the only reason I didn't take students. But I got to go for a week, and it was the propaganda tour of North Korea. We went to the United States Museum, which is all about how the United States are like war criminals. I went to the military parade. It was absolutely amazing.
How do you fly right in there, or do you walk across?
You have to fly into either China or Russia.
Okay.
Then you meet a representative from the North Korean government who has done a background check on you. And there are all these criteria for who's not allowed in. So you can't be in the military. You can't be a religious missionary. You can't actually have any Korean ethnicity because they're afraid that you're going to try to get relatives out. So then they meet with you and they do a final interview, which is supposedly just to approve you before you then fly into Pyongyang. But really, it's to accept a bribe. So you have to basically give them some euros. They only accept euros. And then they let you fly into Pyongyang the next day.
Wow. Okay. I have a feeling that this thread of low anxiety and maybe high risk, I don't know, in high curiosity, that this may be a thread that we will get to in other areas of your life and career. What do you think?
Yeah, it's something that my current partner also is not a huge fan of. I think that my partner would prefer for me to be a little bit lower risk, but I sort of think of life as an adventure. And part of that is because of my childhood, being maybe kind of cloistered and having some symptoms of some mental disorders that were never diagnosed. And so my childhood was very kind of cut off from the world. And so now I feel like I'm trying to make up for lost time.
Okay. All right. So we want to get there, and we want to figure out how psychology has kind of weaved its way through from those early years to decisions you made to become a psych major. And so that's kind of where I would love to go. Now, before we get to your story, you have these textbooks behind you. I love your bookshelf. I love people's bookshelves. I like looking at it when I'm on a Zoom call with them. I've got the same Carl Jung action figure up top. So, but the stack that I'm really interested in behind you is the cults stack.
The cult stuff, yeah.
Yeah. How is that? Yeah.
I teach a class called The Psychology of Cults about indoctrination and what defines a cult. What's the difference between a cult and a religion, for example, or is academia a cult, for example? And so I've been teaching this class now for about 6 or 7 years, and I luckily had the opportunity to do a class on the psychology of cults for the Great Courses. And so that's actually coming out in November. And so it will be available for a lot of people who are at universities or colleges. Many libraries have a database of videos called Canopy. And so people should be able to stream it for free if they have the Canopy database through their library.
Very cool. Tell me about the Great Courses, because I'm not aware of it.
If people are probably familiar with a company called Masterclass, where they get celebrities to do courses, teaching how to do writing or painting or photography or something like that. So the Great Courses is sort of a rival company to Masterclass, where they do these informative educational documentary series, but it's with scholars and academics instead of celebrities. So my course is 12 episodes. Each episode is a half an hour, and it's all about the psychology of cults and indoctrination, understanding cult leaders. What are the personality traits of cult leaders? How do they recruit you? How do they get you to commit to the cult? Things like cognitive dissonance. And then once you're in the cult, how do you get out? What's the process of healing? My own research is on understanding intimate partner violence. And so I do parallels between the psychology of intimate partner violence and cult manipulation. So there's an episode about that. So it's 12 episodes, and I just had so much fun. I don't know, seems like a strange word, but it was fascinating to read about all these historic cults, Jim Jones and Charles Manson. And NXIVM is one that was just in the news a few years ago out of New York, where Keith Raniere was the cult leader. He created this sex cult pyramid where these young women were his sex slaves, and they had to recruit 6 additional sex slaves in this like strange like business model. It was very bizarre.
When you so I think probably like cult documentaries have taken off in popular media in the last few years. Do you still again, we're using weird words here, but enjoy. Right. I would say my wife really enjoys watching that stuff. I don't know why. Right. But do you really enjoy it, or do you feel like you've seen it all and it's just the same thing?
That's a great question.
And maybe it's both.
It is both, because I find it fascinating from the psychological perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And I enjoy it from this kind of voyeur perspective, I guess, but it's also heartbreaking to see these real people's lives being destroyed, and the outward destruction if they're, murdering people. That's, I don't want to say I enjoy that.
Yeah, of course.
But I see the psychology of it, and I see the red flags of it. And so in some ways I wanted to create the course and the documentary series through the great courses to potentially help people from having that experience, right? Just like I do my research on relationship violence to try to be preventive in some ways. But we also have to avoid victim blaming, right? Because it is indoctrination. It is gaslighting. So it's this strange phenomenon, though, of why are people so fascinated by cults? Why are these documentaries so popular on Netflix or Hulu? So it's this really weird meta experience also of, there's a Saturday Night Live skit even about women getting really into like cult documentaries almost as a cult in and of itself. So it's a really interesting psychological phenomenon.
Yeah. And it's predictable, right? If you do get the conditions right, then the cult will be successful somewhat, right?
Right.
And okay, so one final question about this. Who is at risk for being involved in a cult?
That is a great psychological debate, because a lot of scholars say, well, we can have a profile of a cult leader, narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, those kinds of things. A lot of scholars say we don't want to have a profile of a cult member or someone who's at risk of being recruited, because in some ways it's getting close to like victim blaming, like you shouldn't have been so gullible or something like that.
Yep.
By saying that there's a profile, anyone who then doesn't fit that profile feels like I'm not at risk, and so they're not on guard.
Right.
So that's one side of the debate. In one of the episodes of my docuseries, I actually present that side of the debate, but I also say I can see the other side of the debate, which is that there are some things that they have in common. One thing is that people who are going through a life transition are much more likely to join cults because their identity is in flux a little bit. So people who have just graduated from college are more likely to join cults. People who are just going through a death in the family or a relationship breakup are more likely to join cults. So these life transition phases. Another thing that I talk about is we have kind of the dark triad personality traits for cult leaders. And then we have the light triad, I think, for people who join cults, because they don't know they're joining a cult. They're usually lied to about what the group is. They're told it's a legitimate religion or it's a charity or something like that. And they join these groups thinking that they're actually going to do some good in the world. They think this is a group that's either a self-help group or it's a religion where I can, maybe do some community service or, help people find the path to salvation or something. And so it's usually people who have genuinely good intentions and want to make the world a better place. So I find the people who join cults to be some of the nicest, most benevolent people, and then they're being exploited.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So then I said it was my last question about cults, but my follow-up question is this. When you take a look as a psychologist who studied these things and taught on them, when you look at ideologies in the United States, especially right now, like political ideologies, does it have any kind of cult-like similarity?
Yes.
On both sides, do you think it has?
I do. I think regardless of your personal political beliefs, and I have strong personal political beliefs, I do think cult of personality is a real thing, right? And so anytime you become completely closed-minded or you only believe my person is, some sort of messiah, or I'm not trying to get anti-religious, right? Yeah. There might be legitimate messiahs. I don't know. But my person who is, some sort of modern day prophet and can do no wrong, and everything that they say should be taken completely 100% right, like should not be questioned. We're starting to get into potentially like zealot territory, and maybe we just want to have an open mind, and critical thinking is helpful regardless of what side of the aisle you're on.
Well, there you go. Now we can get back to the rest of psychology, which is, a science based in critical thinking. That's what we want to give our students, one of the best skills that we can give them. And I'm sure that's what you're working towards in all of your classes, including that, and all of your writing as well. All right. So let's get, I want to just trace back to your, like, where this all began for you. I think this is kind of one of the most interesting parts of psych sessions, is that we figure out where you came from that made you this person who does all the things that you do, might I say, so successfully. And so you grew up in Iowa. Did you grow up like close to Storm Lake?
No. So Iowa isn't one of the larger states, I guess. But I grew up in Ames, Iowa, which is right in the middle, and it's where Iowa State is. And I grew up there. I don't really think of Ames being particularly rural compared to the rest of Iowa. But it's 50,000. So compared to people who are from actual cities, it's pretty small. But I wasn't on a farm or anything like that. So for me, it's a college town. And my parents both had college educations, and my father was actually ABD in organic chemistry. And so it was always expected that all of their children would go to college. And so we grew up with the expectation that education was our direction, and we would definitely go to college. It was just which college would we go to. No, I have 3 brothers. I'm the only girl. You have 2 sisters, right?
Uh-huh.
Yep. I listened to your origin story.
Yeah.
And it's not actually true that we all went to college. One of my brothers went into the military instead. But the rest of us all did go on to college, and 2 out of 4 of us have advanced degrees.
Okay. And where are you in the birth order?
I'm 3rd out of 4.
Third out of 4.
Okay.
Older. I don't know the research on that, but Eric always asks people. So I'm asking for Eric is basically what I'm doing. But yeah, okay. So you're living in you grow up in a college town with college educated parents. So yeah, there was an expectation, or maybe just that was the norm, maybe for your.
I think most people in Ames, Iowa, are somehow affiliated with the university.
Sure.
most of the people, not everyone, of course, but it's a very sort of college-y type of town. It's most of the people are educated. Ames High School. I don't know, like 80% of the people go to college afterward.
All right. Well, you opened the door to this, so I hope you don't mind if I ask, but you were talking about some undiagnosed
Yes.
symptoms that you were experiencing maybe in childhood. Yes. And I have a feeling that those kind of in some ways are integral into your journey. So you want to talk about that?
Yes. So my interest in cults is somewhat personal, just because I think my family, I don't think we were in a cult officially, but my family dynamics were cult-esque. We were strange. We were just a strange family. My parents kind of cloistered us, I think, partially because they were very religious. We went to parochial school, and I think there were some mental health things that ran in our family. I have epilepsy. I also had symptoms of both Tourette's syndrome and autism spectrum disorder, but they were not diagnosed because my parents didn't take us to the doctor. So they're still undiagnosed. Not the epilepsy, that one's been diagnosed. But because of the kind of, we were also very, very poor. So my parents didn't have the money to buy us clothing in stores, for example. So my mother made us clothes like on her sewing machine at home. So this all combined into making us not the popular family at school. So my entire childhood, I did not have any friends at all until 8th grade. So I had these weird symptoms, right? So I would squeak, I would rock in my chair at school. My hygiene was not great. I was wearing my homemade clothes and just not really having normal facial affect, things like that. And so that was not helped when I mentioned I went to private religious school. I got expelled in 5th grade because I held a protest that the rules were sexist. So it was really not a great social experience for me. So this led me to psychology, because when I realized psychology existed as a field of study, I knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my career, for the rest of my life, because I thought, wow, there's this whole field of study on how to be a human being. And if I can study psychology, I can fit in and be a human and have friends. So that's why I became a psychologist.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to back up and ask you a couple of questions about your story. So let me ask you, before 5th grade, kind of in that time where you realized that you weren't making maybe friends like other people were making for a number of reasons, where did you grieve that? Or did you live in your head about or did you read a lot as a kid?
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
So I hung out with my brothers a lot. I was, I guess, a tomboy. I'm also pansexual. So like 3 out of 4 of us are in the LGBTQ community. And so I didn't know where or who I was. And so books were absolutely like my refuge. So I would be in my room or with my brothers, and all we did all day was read books. And I sort of would go to sci-fi fantasy books, I think, because I could create a world and live in that world where there were robots or dragons or something, because they would accept me. And so books and psychology were my first 2 places where I imagined I can figure out how to be a human being, because when I would read books, it would give me an insight into how people would think and how people would interact, because it was sort of teaching me how do people talk to each other. And the narrator, you can see how they're thinking about things.
Sure.
So it would teach me how do people think. And then psychology was an insight into that, but that wasn't until really a little bit later. And then the other thing that was an insight for me was theater. So when I got to be in plays in middle school and in high school, I loved theater because people had to talk to me because it was in the script. So it was sort of forced interaction. So books, psychology, and theater. And also theater because it was generally kind of other people who were a little bit strange, like me. So I liked theater because the theater crowd was maybe a little bit more accepting.
Yeah.
And so books, theater, and psychology were really the things that in some ways kind of saved my life and made me feel not as isolated.
I would have to survey all of our colleagues to find this out. But I just have a feeling that our teaching colleagues have some sort of theater past more than kind of the general population of people who go to college. I don't know what that is. And maybe I have got to buy a sample, but I am just thinking about all of our teaching psychology colleagues that I know who we've had conversations about, did theater, and they are some of the most successful people, the Eric Landrums, the Jane Hallinans, Lindsay Maslin. I'm forgetting a bunch of people that I know have this background. What is that? And maybe I'm wrong, but what is that? I wonder. And maybe it is this this fascination with being human. And I don't know.
I think it's two things. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's two things. One is theater and psychology are both a study in humanity and what is the human motivation, right? I think there's a lot of trauma in psychology. There's a lot of healing and in theater, right? There's a lot of processing people's emotions in both psychology and theater. There's a lot of sort of surprising about yourself in both.
Sure.
I've talked to a lot of people who are directors, and they say one of the key moments in any play is when someone realizes something about themselves in theater. And I think that in psychology, we're trying to help students realize things about themselves. So I think that's part of it, is that we're drawn to theater because it's this study of humanity. But I think people who are really good teachers bring theater into their classroom, right?
Yeah.
Because we want that kind of engagement with the classroom as our audience. We want our 50 minutes or 75 minutes or however long we have to be exciting and engaging and passionate, almost like a one-act play every single day.
Yeah, it's performative, certainly.
Absolutely.
So that could be another connection. So anyway, somebody out there should do this research for us and tell us why that is the case. And then across disciplines, is it the same, that performative piece? All right. So when you're 10 years old, you get kicked out of school for putting on what was it? It was a rally. It was a what?
I did a 2-week protest at my religious school.
What does that look like at 10?
Their policies were, so they basically only allowed the boys to have sort of like certain leadership roles in the school. And all my brothers got to do this and I didn't. And I went to the principal and I basically said, this is sexist. I'm not having it. And the principal didn't care for that or my attitude. And that wasn't the first time that I gotten in trouble. And so they basically said, well, follow the rules. And so the only protest you can do in 5th grade is kind of like I decided we had been learning about like Martin Luther King Jr. and, peaceful protest. And so I said, well, okay, I'm going to apply my knowledge. And so I just said, I'm not going to speak until the policy is changed. So I wouldn't answer questions or engage in the classroom. So it was sort of me being silent to show that they were silencing my voice by this policy. And so after 2 weeks, they expelled me. I went to public school after that.
Okay, at 10 years old, so 5th grade, what was I doing? I was playing sports and probably on the playground or whatever, and probably trying to hang out with my friends and get accepted. And you were out there protesting. What is it like? Where did this come from in you? And who told you it was okay? Did anybody give you permission? Somebody, your brothers, your family? Did anybody say this was a good idea?
Absolutely not.
But
I mean, like I said, I was a very strange child.
Yeah. Has that stuck with you? Do you have a strong sense of justice right now? Like, even has it followed you?
I hope so. I'm the director of the gender studies program at my university as well. I think partially because I felt disenfranchised and stigmatized and ostracized for most of my life, I try now to not allow that to happen to other people. Everyone just wants respect and validation. And that's one of the reasons that I am in psychology. And that's one of the things when I put these textbooks out, I try to really emphasize that. So I have an introduction to psychology book coming out in the fall. And one of the things that I think makes it different from some of the other intro psych books is that we really emphasize stigma. So in the chapter on psychological disorders, there's an entire section on mental health stigma and why that matters. The other textbooks that are out there on the market, many of which are fantastic, talk about in the motivation and emotion chapter, pretty much everyone talks about hunger as an example of motivation and emotion. Is it motivation? Is it emotion? Hunger is a great example of sort of the biopsychosocial model because people don't always eat just because they're hungry. Sometimes it's comfort food or because it's a social occasion that you eat a feast or something. So everyone talks about hunger, and almost every textbook talks about obesity as being a problem. And sure, obesity is a problem in the United States, but in this textbook, we also talk about the stigma that we give to people based on body size, and we talk about body positivity. So I really want people in the psychology class to feel seen and respected.
Okay, so when is that book coming out, by the way? We should give it a quick plug here. So what is the name of the book and when's it coming out? When can people kind of get their hands on it, or are you still reviewing?
The reviews are done. It's coming out in January of 2025, and it's called Psychology and Our Curious World. It's with Sage Publication.
Okay, and you said we, so who else is on this title? I'm guessing there's co-authors.
There are co-authors.
Or else it's nuts. If you wrote an intro psych textbook all by yourself from scratch, oh my goodness. We got other things to talk about.
That is a huge endeavor. It has been years in the works, actually.
Okay.
So I'm really proud of the co-author team, actually. And we are all absolutely just fantastic friends, and we get along great, which has been a blessing as well.
Cool.
So Gary Lewandowski in New Jersey is a co-author. Charity Griffin is a co-author. She's in HBCU. And then Tom Heinzen is an emeritus professor in New Jersey. And so that's the co-author team. And we are all from different backgrounds, and that partially made it a really nice team. And one of the things I'm really proud of is that we have all agreed to give 10% of our royalties to charity. And so we are really proud of the fact that we've all chosen a different charity that's close to our hearts. And so is it okay if I mention the charity?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's go.
So for me, I have a family member who is a 2-time suicide survivor. suicide attempt survivor. And I also mentioned that several members of my family, including myself, are in the LGBTQ community. So I'm actually splitting my charity donations between two charities. One is the Wounded Warrior Project, which helps veterans with mental health needs.
Yep.
And then the other charity I'll be giving money to is the Trevor Project, which helps prevent suicides for LGBTQ people.
Right on.
Then Gary Lewandowski has chosen to give his charity donation to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So they help people who have various illnesses make their wishes come true. Of any kind of wish that they have. And then Charity Griffin, I mentioned that she's a professor at an HBCU, so historically Black colleges and universities. So she's giving her charity money to the Thurgood Marshall Foundation. So they give scholarships to people of color to be able to go to college at HBCUs. And then Tom Heinzen is giving his charity donation to an organization called Glass Roots, which actually helps people from urban areas in New York and New Jersey who are young people in the community learn about business and entrepreneurship in the form of learning about business models through glass art. So it's combining art and business and helping young people learn about how to have business skills through art.
So cool. So cool. I haven't heard of that being done before, for a big textbook title. Although I know that textbook authors and the ones that I know are very generous. Y'all are very generous people. And I really love that about you. I wonder if there, again, is some sort of, correlation between the generosity of writing something new that you think is going to be helpful for people, and then also your generosity to give it away and to give, in this case, cash away to those folks. And as somebody who runs a nonprofit, I know how much that means to people in those positions to have a check coming in every once in a while. And I'm going to imagine it's a little unexpected in your, when you're getting those royalty checks, that you don't know what it's going to be. So sometimes they're going to be as surprised as y'all are. And I hope in the best way. So, okay, well, that's great. So now we're kind of into your, how did you get introduced to psychology in your childhood? If we can pop back into, what is this, teenage years?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So one of my first friends in middle school, she actually, so she had an eating disorder and she went to therapy. And I think that's kind of where I figured out what psychology was she had a therapist. And I thought, oh, okay, there are people out there who are trying to help other people. And so that's how I learned what psychology was. At first, I thought it was just therapy. And I thought, I'm not particularly suited for therapy, but when I realized that there was more to psychology, that's when I really fell in love with it as a field. And then I took a sort of an introduction to psychology class in high school, and I have done the AP reading that you mentioned earlier. I did that for about 6 years.
Whoa, okay. I wonder if we overlapped. We must have.
I'm sure we did.
Yeah.
It's hundreds of people.
Right.
Those essays. So I knew I liked psychology, and then but I was only able to take sort of that one class in high school. So then when I went to college, I double majored in psychology and theater. And I know you, from some of the other episodes I've listened to, you asked people sort of, did you know that you were going to be a psychology major? And a lot of people change their major. I know you started as a business major.
Yeah.
I think something else in Canada, right?
Yeah. Commerce,
right?
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to be a psychology major and a double major with theater. And I was 95% sure I wanted to be a psychology professor because I loved, reading and books, and I loved college. But I had this tiny little hope that maybe I would do theater, like be a professional actress or something. That was crushed very quickly because I went to BVU, which is where I'm a professor now. So this is my alma mater, and I love BVU. So this is not anti-BVU, but it is anti this one professor. So when I went here many, many years ago, it's a small school. So there's only one theater professor, and I tried out for my very first play as a little, 18-year-old first year student, all excited about my theater major. And it was A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I was familiar with the Shakespeare. I had read the play. I understood the actors or the characters. I mean, so I try out and he calls me back and I'm going to the callbacks and, he keeps asking me to read for one of the two main female characters in this play. And I'm all excited, like I'm going to get a good role and I'm just a first year student. And he actually kept me this isn't like a weird harassment story. But he kept me later compared to most of the other people trying out for this show. And at the very end of the auditions, he said, well, Wind, I want you to know that you're really talented and you can really read the lines very well. And I can tell that you understand the Shakespeare. And I'm glad you're a theater major because I think you're going to be very helpful. And I think you're going to be a really good director. But I'm not going to be able to give you a very good role in this play because you're just not pretty enough to be an actress. And I thought, okay, I guess I'll be focusing on the psychology.
Oh, yeah. You knew enough. You had enough sense that you knew that this was not right.
Well, it's upsetting to hear.
Of course. But I think that some people might just say, I'm going to guess because of where you landed and then some of the justice stuff early in your life that at that point, you knew that this was like more about this person than it was about you. Although I'm sure it hurt.
It was hurtful to hear that. I also sort of went all in on the feminism at that point in my life.
Yeah, of course.
And I remained a theater major for my entire time here. And he kept casting me as a man in every play. But I did decide at that point, I guess I'll become a psychology professor. So I have always, from a month into college, known that I was going to become a psychology professor.
Yeah. Oh, that's heartbreaking. I sometimes, whether it's in these conversations or when I'm giving talks at conferences or whatever, sometimes I'll ask people to think about the professor who had the most impact in their life. Usually it's a very positive experience. Every once in a while, you get people who have these nightmare kind of experiences. But they're so formative. It puts them onto another track, or it clarifies what their future is going to be, or whatever it is. Anyway, I'm sure you had great people as well, but it is sometimes the people who are who are the most incompetent or the meanest or who can shape our futures in different ways as well. And you probably think about that from time to time when you are working with students, I imagine.
I absolutely do. I mean, I would never want to say something like that to a student and have them kind of be haunted by that for the rest of their lives.
Ugh. Yeah. Because that's what it is, especially at that age, right? It can get to that point where it just sits there for a long, long time.
It was not helpful for my self-esteem.
I bet it was not. Okay. So full on theater major and then psych major. And you now are kind of committed to that career probably at that point, right? You're thinking about being a professor. So you finish your psych major. Did you have lab experience and stuff as an undergraduate?
We don't really have labs here because we're such a small school. The entire university student body, we have online students, but for the brick and mortar campus here in Storm Lake, we only have 700 students for the whole university.
Yep.
So there are only 3 psychology faculty for the whole university. So we really are very sort of teaching focused. We have something that I've actually created now that I'm a professor here. We have a psychology research club where we do a research project. It's extracurricular. We take students to conferences, MPA in Chicago every year. Sometimes I see Eric there. So We do have them do research outside of class, and the conference presentations. I help them publish sometimes in undergraduate journals, but I didn't really have that experience. I had to do summer internships back at Iowa State, actually, in my summers, and that's what helped me to kind of get into graduate school. And so now I try to help my students do that.
Yeah,
because I know that that's the kind of thing they're going to have to do to get into graduate school.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of ask because it's timely for me. I'm at a community college. We don't give students any kind of research experience. We are fortunate in that we are allowed in our state to teach them research methods, which is my favorite course to teach. And so I get to have that experience with them. But by the time they transfer into to the University of Washington in Seattle or something like that, they're sort of behind in their research experience. And so we're trying to figure that out. Like, how can we bridge that gap a little bit better? This year, I will take a group of students for the first time next spring to WPA. Just to experience it, right?
Yeah.
They won't be presenting, but just to experience it and to understand what that world, give them that regional conference experience to understand what the profession looks like in academia. Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about it. So anyway, okay. So we're running a little low on time. We got about 10 minutes and I want to get to some other things. So as you finish up your undergraduate degree in psychology, how did you decide to go to grad school and how did you decide which grad school to go to?
Well, I knew I had to do grad school if I wanted to be a professor. And so I knew that was always the plan for me. I did not have a lot of great guidance as to how to choose a graduate school or even what graduate school would look like. So I was kind of lost when it came to applying. I just sort of I chose schools because the name of the school was prestigious, like Harvard or Yale, and that was a bad model. Not that those schools aren't great, but I knew I wanted to do social psychology and I didn't know how to choose doctoral programs that were particularly good in that area of psychology, right? So I actually remember the application for Yale. You apply to the graduate school in general. This was at least, 30 years ago when I was applying to the graduate school. It's probably different now that we have computers, but back then you had to do it in the mail. And so they sent me in the mail the little form I had to fill out with my actual pencil and there's little Scantron. And because I'm older, and
our audience gets this. We're with you.
I know you can't see me, Garth's audience, but I actually had to do this in the mail. And they actually had a space where I was supposed to write in the numbers of my patents. And I remember thinking, I don't have any of those. I don't have any patents. So maybe I'm not going to get into your graduate school.
Wow.
So
did in your at your undergraduate institution at Buena Vista, did you have somebody who was guiding you through this, or was that kind of where the guidance was ending, like as you were applying?
So I told them I wanted to be a professor, and they said, "Okay, you're going to need a PhD. Here's a book." And they handed me this big book that was like 400 pages, and it just listed every school in the United States that had a PhD program in any kind of psychology and their address, basically. Okay. And so I just sort of picked a dozen of them.
Yeah.
And I think maybe they had email addresses. Yeah. That was about as far as technology went back then. Yeah. And I emailed them or physically mailed them sort of an inquiry. And I remember back then you had to pay about $100 to apply. So it cost me about $1,000 to apply because I also had to pay for like the certified mail to get the application packet to them. So I applied for 11 schools actually. And I only got into 2 and I visited those 2. It was University of Connecticut and Purdue. And I went to Purdue because it was just more well-known in the Midwest. And I'm from the Midwest. And that's how I went to Purdue.
Yeah. So at that point, any benefit you have of coming from a college educated family, you kind of, all that knowledge kind of ran its course by that time. And then you were on your own, like so many people.
because they didn't really know how to help me get
Yeah.
into psychology specific graduate school. They were pretty clueless about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you end up at Purdue. I guess everything went pretty well. You stayed there for a while, right?
Yeah. Purdue was a good education. And then by the time I got out of there, I did pretty well on the job market to become a professor. I got several offers to become a professor, ended up going straight to Boise State, and I was there for 2 years. But then the job opened here at BVU, and it's my alma mater. And so I ended up coming back here because it felt like home, and it's a small liberal arts school. And that's really kind of where my heart was.
Any kind of notable things that you remember from graduate school that you would want to share? You did a master's and a PhD both, right, at Purdue?
I did.
Yeah.
I think for me, the main memory that I have was just I was so poor. I sold my blood twice a week for 3 years because we weren't allowed to have jobs at Purdue. So they basically told us, if you have a job, like waiting tables or something like that, you're not spending enough time on your studies. So if they found out we had a job, they would kick us out. So I had 2 secret jobs. One was selling my plasma, selling my blood, which I could sort of do, off the radar. So I sold my blood, and I remember I got paid $40 each time I did that.
Were you sick all the time?
I was sick and tired and kind of just like won all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't afford a car, so I had to take the city bus to like the blood plasma place. And I remember that there was a guy who was like apparently on the same donation route or timetable that I was, and he had like this pet bird that would sit on his shoulder and it would like poop on him all the time. So I was like, oh yeah, there's bird poop guy. So I have that memory vividly in my head. And then I also had a secret job where I was an overnight security guard at the mental hospital in West Lafayette, Indiana. So I did that for 2 years. So I feel like don't tell, or they might take away my doctorate. But I was the overnight security guard at the mental hospital for 2 years. Secret job that I did just to eat, basically, while I was in grad school. So I was just so poor. So I remember just being kind of miserable because I was like eating, like ramen noodles and mac and cheese just to get by.
Yeah.
But it was totally worth it because I love my job now. But it was pretty miserable there for a while.
Well, and I just want to go back to those 11 applications that you sent out for $100 a pop. I'm sure that was quite a sacrifice. So sometimes not knowing how to navigate a system is costly, not only in like your energy, but also financially. And so, that's why it's just so good that I think most institutions have fairly good advising. Like, I think hopefully we've learned something in the institute to help students a little more.
Right. And I mentioned earlier, like my family was just poor, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't have savings. I didn't have money. So every dollar really mattered. $1,000 to apply for graduate school was all the money I had saved for my entire college life.
Yeah.
So it's the investment that I had for myself because I knew this is setting up my entire career, right? But it was kind of painful at the time.
How did you pay for grad school?
Well, they gave me tuition remission in exchange for being a teaching assistant and a research assistant, and then a stipend. It was like $12,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So, that's not a lot of money to live on, which is why I had to do the plasma and the secret overnight job.
Yeah.
I lived on like credit cards for a long time.
Yeah.
I went to a lot of like call out for the, bingo club because we're going to have pizza. And so I would go to the bingo club just because have free pizza and pretend like I wanted to play bingo, and just because they would have free pizza. For a while, my partner and I, they would have things like, we're going to have a meeting at a restaurant and I would have to go. but we couldn't afford to buy something at the restaurant. So we would order water, and then we would order an appetizer, and we'd split the appetizer as our food.
Yeah.
So, it was pretty sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to see it at my current institution, and I hope that others are doing this as well, that there is we now have a process for helping students basically in these sorts of situations in emergency grant funding. And it's quite generous, and it doesn't ask a lot of questions. It's kind of the right way to do it. And I don't think that there's a bunch of students taking advantage of it. It's a very nice thing. And so I hope that's happening more and more at our institutions. Yeah. So you end up back in Storm Lake. How did things change there from the time you left to the time you were employed by them?
In some ways, the student body has changed because I think when I was a student here, there had just been a very generous financial donation to the university. And so the endowment was sort of at its peak for the university, and they had just built a bunch of brand new buildings on the campus. And so it was really competitive to get in when I went to BVU. And now that's less true. So basically I think the student body has changed a little bit, and I feel like they're maybe less prepared for college, and so they need a little bit more nurturing. Yeah. So one of the things that I find is that the students just need more care, I think. And I don't know if that's because of COVID. I don't know if that's just a generational effect, but I think maybe it's that we're recognizing mental health issues better than in previous generations. I think a lot of students just need some reassurance that we care about them as people, and then we're not just here to grade their papers. So I feel like maybe it's just me seeing the professor side that I didn't acknowledge when I was a student. But I think something that the faculty talk a lot about, and I think this is probably true across the nation at every institution of higher learning, is I think the students right now just need someone to see them, see them as people and see them as more than just their student ID. I think they want to be acknowledged as individual humans who have some flexibility of needs, right? That a deadline, of course, we need to hold them responsible and teach them accountability, but a deadline can be changed if you have a human moment. Yeah,
absolutely. I read something that you wrote for STP back because I noticed, now we kind of divide time of like post-pandemic and pre-pandemic, but it was pre-pandemic, and it was just it was a quick little kind of like classroom article, and it was about kind of, I don't know, an intermission or something in a class, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? Do you remember? Sometimes I write things and then I'm like, oh yeah, I did write that, didn't I?
Yeah, wow, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. But
when I teach intro psych, halfway through I do intermission, and it's something silly like, for anyone who watches Doctor Who, what does TARDIS stand for? And things like that. And it's a complete break from whatever we're talking about. It's halfway through. It partially just like wakes them up if they were kind of zoning out, which everybody does. I zone out in faculty meetings,
For sure.
It's just fun, and it's just kind of to remind them that, first of all, we should all be having fun in here, and we're all humans, and I'm a nerd and I watch Doctor Who, and it's just kind of like, let's just remind each other that we're all here and we're humans, and the world can sometimes be frustrating, and we're all sad sometimes, and we're all just here for a common purpose, right? Like, we're all here because we want to learn and we want to make the world better, and just check in with each other. Like, how's everybody doing?
Yeah. Well, what you talked about with regards to your students now, and kind of what your students need. I feel like in your past, there's evidence here, even in this article, that that's kind of always been a part of who you are, which is kind of valuing the human and the student experience at the same time. I'm sure your students, actually, I know your students and your institution appreciate it because they have recognized your teaching. So yeah, that's fantastic. So how long have you now been at Buena Vista?
This is my 20th year.
Wow. That is a mark. And you've been teaching in higher ed for over 20 years. Kind of my last question is going to be, how has that changed? How have you changed as an instructor now, 20 years in? Like, what kind of freedom do you have? Are you breaking any rules that you wouldn't have formed? Okay, good. Yeah, you peaked up there. So what's going on?
Yeah. Well, one is, I don't know if I shouldn't say this out loud. The state of Iowa's got some rules for public schools in what we are and are not allowed to actually teach in our classroom.
Yes.
That I am breaking, which I'm allowed to break because we are a private school. And the president of the university is supportive of that. I'm just going to say the words critical race theory. So I do tend to kind of push the boundaries of we should be talking about things like intersectionality. That is a real thing. And talking about the controversy and talking about these issues. If we ignore them, they're not going to magically get better. But also just in terms of my teaching style, I teach less material. I don't try to cram every single word that's in the book into my class because you're not going to remember it anyway.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what matters in people's lives, talk about how you can apply it. You know, I know you've talked about these issues in the podcast. How are you actually going to use this in your life? What is it? Why do we care about these things? Why is psychology important? How are you actually using psychology in your life every day? When you go to the store and you're choosing what products to buy, when you're having an argument with your friend, when you're trying to decide whether or not you want to marry this person, that's all psychology. I listened to your episode about how kitchens were redesigned, right? And so that's psychology, right?
Yeah.
So all of this stuff is psychology. So when I design my classes, like psychology of cults, right? Potentially this could stop someone from joining a cult. That would be my sort of fantasy of how this actually matters in someone's life. So, and flexibility of deadlines, right? I used to be kind of like a hard ass, and, you know, if someone is 0.5 away from the next grade up, but they've really tried, I'm going to round up, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just a lot more chill now because, you know, if you've tried, I want to reward that.
Yeah.
So I think I come from a more sort of humanistic perspective now than I used to.
Yeah. I love it. So do I. I always, when I'm rounding up, I justify it by, I've got bias. I probably got something wrong at some point.
Right.
So there you go. Yeah.
But I try to make sure that I'm not more generous to certain kinds of students, right? Because now implicit bias is going to come into play.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I just wanted to make sure that we got through all of the stuff, the cool stuff that you're doing. And now I know we talked about that intro psych book. You also do a social psych book. That's your area. So how long have you been doing that one for?
Social psych is actually going to be coming out in its 3rd edition next year.
Congrats.
So that's been really very successful, and I'm really proud of that one. And that's also through Sage. And then I also have a relationships textbook, and also through Sage. And the first edition of that was sole author, but Gary Lewandowski is going to be co-author on the 2nd edition. So I'm excited to bring him in, and he's just a fantastic guy, and he's got great ideas for how to make the 2nd edition even better.
Didn't he also write a research methods book somewhere?
He does. He has a research methods book too.
Does this guy just write? He just locks himself away and writes all day. Anyway, I'll look forward to talking to him at some point as well.
Yeah.
Well, hey, do you have any final things that you want to share, or any other projects that you're super excited about as we finish up today?
Well, I want to thank you for all the service that you do to psychology too, with like the APA guidelines and everything, and this podcast. It's fantastic, and so thank you for that. I have 3 audiobooks through Audible that are free for people who are Audible Prime members, and so I'll just mention that. And then the Cults documentary series that should be out on Canopy for free for anybody who has that subscription for colleges and universities. And then I was going to show it, but people who are listening can't see. In November, I co-authored a book on the psychology of the Handmaid's Tale. So it's very timely for some of the changes going on politically in our country right now. So people who are fans of Margaret Atwood's books or the Hulu series of The Handmaid's Tale, the co-edited book comes out in October or November, anywhere where books are sold. And it's got a lot of great chapters about motherhood and the trauma of being told how to use your body.
Yeah. That one, if folks have not seen that show, I would say watch the show, read the Atwood book, and then read Wynn's book.
Thanks.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. And by the way, I think I saw this at some point in an email we sent, but if you want to check out that intro psych book that is coming out, collegepublishing.sagehub.com, I think is where people are going to find that. Wind, it was so nice to finally get you on record here. And thanks for taking the time to meet with me and to share your story with our audience.
Thanks so much for letting me share with you. It was really my pleasure.
Thanks.
Hey, listeners, to check out Wynn's Psychology and Our Curious World book, please visit collegepublishing.sagepub.com/intro psych.